Next on KQED Newsroom, N.F.L. football players accused of domestic violence and a possible cover-up by the league. A tale of two cities. Voters in San Jose and Oakland will decide on their next mayors.
We have one more thing.
Apple gets into the watch business. Is it a smart move? Plus, an exhibit of seldom-seen images by famed photographer Robert Frank.
You see here a young artist of enormous talent figuring something out.
Good evening and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Scott Schaefer is off tonight. Another report today of violence by a football player. Minnesota Viking star running back Adrian Peterson has been indicted on charges of negligent injury to a child for striking his son with a tree branch. This comes during a week of national outrage over alleged domestic violence in the N.F.L. after surveillance video became public showing Ravens player Ray Rice knocking out his then-fiancée. We're choosing not to show the video. In the Bay Area, 49er Ray McDonald was arrested Labor Day weekend on suspicion of felony domestic violence following a fight with his pregnant fiancée. Still, McDonald was allowed to play in the 49er season opener. I spoke with San Francisco Chronicle sports columnist Killion about the domestic violence accusations and the fallout. Killion, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
You've covered sports for more than 20 years. How would you describe the NFL's reaction and their handling of the Ray Rice situation?
It's been pretty much a disaster since this situation unfolded. The actual incident occurred in February. The legal system dropped the ball first, but then the NFL, which Commissioner Goodell has had a very, tough policy, handed out suspensions right and left, and he knew that this woman was unconscious on an elevator. He knew that Rice had said he hit her, and he gave him a slap on the wrist, and then this other video comes out, a very damning video that shows how brutal an attack it was. I don't think they needed this other video to know what had happened on that elevator. And so I think that's why there's so much outrage, is that it's been a slow build.
Well, Goodell claims that he didn't really know. He used the word ambiguous to describe what happened. There are now reports that Rice told Goodell that in June that he punched Janae Rice, then his fiancée. Goodell has made the statement that he didn't really know exactly what happened until after he saw the video on TMZ. At this point, how important is it what he knew and when he knew it, or is that beside the point?
Well, I think it's certainly beside the point when you're talking about the bigger issue of domestic violence and how sports leagues discipline their players and how to talk about this issue and how to solve it. But I think when the commissioner is the face of the league, I think when a commissioner, appears to be covering things up, appears not to understand the severity of this issue, appears not to care about it or understand how damaging it can be to his league, that's to the point. That's relevant.
And this is an issue that hits home here, of course, because with the 49ers, we have Ray McDonald, who was allowed to play after his arrest for felony domestic violence. The Niners say they have a zero-tolerance policy. Was that policy good enough in this case? Should he have been allowed to play?
What disturbs me most about the 49ers is that they present themselves as an upstanding community member, a company that the community can be proud of. They haven't taken a leadership position on this issue. They don't seem to understand that the climate around this issue changed dramatically a couple of days before their own player got arrested. They've kind of been conducting themselves as though it's business as usual, and business as usual, sadly, in the NFL is brushing this issue under the rug. It's been going on for years, but things changed. Things changed with the Ray Rice situation. But yeah, I would have liked to have seen them sit him out of deference to the severity of the issue and out of an understanding that this is kind of bigger than football.
Because there are other organizations that do that. Police, for example, firefighters, when they're investigated for a misconduct accusation.
Yes.
They are suspended with pay. They're not fired,
Right.
but they're suspended with pay.
And many companies would have the same policy. They would put you on a leave of absence while it's sorted out.
Wanted to return to the Rice case real quickly. Do you think that this is a pivotal moment where sports could be a catalyst for social change, or will Roger Goodell simply go back to making $44 million a year, overseeing a $10 billion sport?
No, I think it really can be a catalyst. I think there is a moment in time. I mean, I think that's what this is. And, there are moments in time with a lot of different issues. And I think for many people, the Ray Rice video is very hard to watch, and having it played over and over and over again is kind of exploitive. However, many people have never seen domestic violence. Many people think it's just, a spat or an argument. They don't understand what it could be. And so I think it opened the eyes of a lot of people, and I think that's a good thing. And I think seeing a man who does make $44 million a year and oversees one of the most powerful organizations on the globe possibly lose his job over his careless handling of this issue makes this very much a moment, pivotal moment where there's going to be a lot more awareness. Now, is it going to impact the N.F.L? Are people going to turn off their television sets? Probably not in great numbers, but it will make an impact, I think.
Okay. And meanwhile, there is an independent investigation going on, and the nation is watching. And Killion, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
And on to politics now. It is election season, and this November there are two big city mayoral contests in the Bay Area, San Jose and Oakland. In San Jose, Mayor Chuck Reed is being termed out. The race is down to two, Councilmember Sam Liccardo and Dave Cortese, a Santa Clara County Supervisor and former Vice Mayor. In Oakland, with ranked choice voting, incumbent Jean Quan faces 14 challengers, including City Council members Rebecca Kaplan and Libby Schaaf. Joining me to break it all down are Scott Herhold, columnist with the San Jose Mercury News, and Bob Gammon, East Bay Express editor. Bob, let's start in Oakland. What are the dynamics in that race?
Well, there are 15 candidates total, but probably 7 top candidates in the race. And so voters are going to have to pick between those 7. Right now, you've got kind of on the farthest left is Dan Siegel, who's probably the most liberal candidate. And on the kind of on the right, but not really the right, it's the moderate, is Brian Parker. And in between, you've got Rebecca Kaplan, council member, the mayor, of course, Jean Quan, Libby Schaaf, Joe Tuman, and Courtney Ruby, the city auditor.
Are there major differences between them? That's a big field to choose from.
There is. There are major differences between Dan Siegel on one side and Brian Parker on the other. But in between, it's gradations of liberal, really. I mean, Oakland's a very liberal town. There aren't any Republicans really running in the race that have a chance of winning. And so it's there aren't a whole lot of big differences between the candidates.
Well, what are some of the major concerns of Oakland residents, and how are they being addressed by the candidates? And is there one clear frontrunner?
Well, according to the polls, Rebecca Kaplan is doing very well. There was a recent poll out this week that showed her with a pretty sizable lead. It's hard to know how valid that poll was, though, because the pollster hasn't released the background information on the poll, but it showed her with a 20-point lead over Jean Quan. But Quan was behind the polls in 2010 and came in one at the last moment, so it's unclear.
But are they but what about the voters? Are they most concerned about crime, about education, about the economy?
A year ago, crime would have been the dominating issue of this campaign. But since then, crime is down about 30 or 40% across the board this year in Oakland. In fact, Oakland hasn't had a homicide in 6 weeks as of today, which is an amazing stat when you think about it, because summertime is typically the most violent time of the year in Oakland.
And if you think about just 2 years ago, there was a crime wave, and
Right.
there was a lot of anxiety and anger over that.
Right.
Talk about ranked choice voting for a moment here, because
Sure.
ranked choice voting played a big role 4 years ago
It did.
when Jean Quan beat out ex-Senator Don Parada. How is it likely to play out this year?
It's unclear right now, because 4 years ago it was a clear choice, and Jean Quan and Rebecca Kaplan teamed up together to take on Don Parada. They each told their supporters to vote for the other person as their second or third choice, and in the end it was Rebecca Kaplan voters who put Jean Quan over the top. This time around it's unclear. I haven't seen any alliances forming with 7 top candidates. If you decide to, hey, I want to pair up with another candidate, then you run the risk of angering the supporters of the other candidates. And so it's kind of a dicey situation, and so it may not happen the same way this year.
And Jean Quan is so highly unpopular right now. There was the Occupy Oakland protests, concerns about how that was handled. She's had a number of police chiefs leave. Anthony Batts left under her watch. What else has made her so unpopular? But she also seems to be making some strides on the economic front as well. And are people recognizing that in Oakland?
I'm not sure that they're recognizing the economic changes in Oakland, definitely. I mean, the restaurant boom is amazing in Oakland. It's the place to eat now. Arts and culture is huge in the city again. The economy is really rebounding. I'm not sure if people are giving her credit for it. One of the problems that she's had is that she hasn't been as good at telling her own story, at saying, hey, look at how great Oakland is and this is what we've done to help it along. And so instead she's had a number of missteps, some verbal miscues over the years, and she kind of gets in trouble with things. And so people, I think, remember that.
Okay, but don't count her out because she's a formidable
She is. She's an amazing
contender.
campaigner.
Yes.
Yeah,
she works hard.
Right.
Let's turn now to San Jose, where it's a much smaller field, 2 candidates. And Scott, what are the key differences between those two, Sam Liccardo and Dave Cortese?
Well, really, it's a question of their allegiances, what uniforms they wear, if you will. Dave Cortese is the standard bearer for Labor, and Sam Liccardo is more the standard bearer for a kind of moderate Democrat who has endorsed pension reform. So the big differences deal, in fact, with the former mayor's Measure B pension reform, which passed in 2012. Labor does not like that. Sam Liccardo has backed it. Labor is a significant force in San Jose. Whether they're going to be able to carry Cortese to office is questionable, because Liccardo goes into this, I think, with more people having voted toward his side in the primary than voted for Cortese's side, even though Cortese himself was the top vote getter.
What would the pension reform do, and why has it caused such a severe split? Because you also have a lot of the former police chiefs who have come into town to San Jose to criticize it as well.
Right. Well, it's plenty complicated, but basically it would reduce the sort of top pension, particularly for somebody who is kind of mid-career. So if you're a policeman with, say, 10 or 12 years in, it could significantly affect how much you get when you retire. You would not get the 90%, and if you opted out of this, then you'd have to pay much more for your pension. It's a much less attractive deal. And so what's happened is that police officers and firefighters have started to leave, and they're finding it hard to have people stay with the force. So although they've had a couple of police academies, they're going through the academies and then joining somewhere else,
Yeah, and also the next police academy in San Jose has just 29 cadets. Right. Are there some other issues besides the pension reform and the debate over public safety, how that's been impacted by pension reform? What else differentiates the two men?
Well, we were talking a little bit about this, but it is very likely that the issues in San Jose may be different in this coming 4 years than they were in the previous 4 years. So, for example, crime has been an issue, but crime in San Jose is down overall this year. And it may well be that issues of development, which have traditionally driven politics in San Jose, may be key. There's always a push and pull between people who want to have denser development, more houses, and frankly, the basic suburban folks who like San Jose for what it is.
And is there a distinction between Liccardo and Cortese on that issue?
Well, subtle. I think you could probably say that Liccardo is a little more attuned to the notion of careful planning, he was head of the general plan. Cortese, I think, has, in the past anyway, tried to be a kind of a deal maker with developers. And he also, of course, has the backing of labor. Labor would like work. and it makes sense.
Okay, and it is interesting how similar the two men are. They're both of Italian heritage. They both went to the elite all-boys academy, Bellarmine.
Exactly. One of them went on to Georgetown and Harvard Law School. The other went on to Davis. Cortese went on to Davis and Lincoln Law School.
Well, they're both attorneys as well.
And they're both attorneys. And both athletes, by the way, too.
All right, Scott Herhold, columnist with the San Jose Mercury News, and East Bay Express editor Bob Gammon. Thank you both for being here. And early voting by mail, starts in just a few weeks. Thank you. Well, this week, Apple unveiled its much-hyped smartwatch. It marks the company's entry into the wearable devices market. Like many of its predecessors, the watch collects personal health information. KQED newscaster Joshua Johnson sat down earlier with KQED senior science editor Andrea Kissick to discuss the potential for these devices and the concerns.
Andrea Kissick, welcome.
Thank you.
Before we talk about the Apple Watch, let's talk about the market that this watch supposedly fits into, particularly what's been called the mobile health industry. What exactly is that, and how big a market is it?
Well, it's getting to be a bigger market every day. It's a multi-billion-dollar market right now. It includes lots of things. So it includes wearables like the health bands, the Fitbit, the Jawbone, the smartwatches, even Google Glass. The most apps that were designed early on were health apps. Surgeons were using Google Glass, say. But it also includes things like direct-to-consumer tests like 23andMe and uBiome, which is tests your microbiome and sends it back, and you can go online and share information. And but there's like 40,000 health and fitness apps right now in smartphones available. So it's really quite a big market and encompasses a lot of different things.
Now, these web-enabled watches lately are nothing new. Samsung has one, the Gear. Motorola just released the Moto 360. There's the Pebble, which works with iPhone and Android. So Apple is a little bit late to this game, but what is the Apple Watch supposed to do that's unique?
Well, Apple is a little late to the party, but that's often the case. It will come into a niche field a little late and sort of define it. So people have high expectations for Apple in this area. Well, this watch, unlike others, does offer an ability to pay for goods with it, a new system that Apple has launched. You can send and receive messages, you can access maps, and you can monitor your health and fitness tracking. And that's probably the part that I find the most interesting. That does exist on other smartwatches and wearables, but what Apple wants to do with that is a bit different.
Now, we should be clear, this is not just another pedometer to measure how many steps you take or how much running you do. There seem to be applications with this that go not just to fitness, but to health, to your actual medical health.
Well, it does monitor health rate, or heart rate rather, and whether you're sitting or standing or exercising. But then it's going to share that information, that data, with other health apps that Apple has designed, including HealthKit, which was a platform it rolled out a few months ago. And that they have partnerships now with several health providers. And that's a new thing, because that's when you're taking these sort of first generation activity trackers and really taking them to this next level, which is maybe a little more actionable. Apple is working with medical providers as well as medical record companies.
So this is information that could end up being sent to your doctor, where theoretically, your doctor could know how active you'd been or what your heart rate was like at certain times a day or how much you slept.
Yeah, I mean, doctors are having to now, at least in the Bay Area where people are a little more savvy with these things, figure out what to do with 6 months of Fitbit data. So, there's folks are coming up with ways to filter information to the doctors and so forth. And definitely in this day and age with digital health, where it's going, the doctor-patient relationship is becoming a little in flux.
Now, my concern with these devices personally is always privacy. We hear so much about data breaches at Home Depot and Target and everywhere else. And now you've got a computer that sits, on a radial artery feeding information to Apple all the time. What do we do about the privacy piece?
Right, because now you have this watch that basically you can pay for goods with. Most of the big banks are on board for this new Apple Pay, and you can share your health data. So they've been consulting with lawyers, and I think that's what people will be really concerned about is, what are insurance companies going to start gathering this data? Are we going to get dinged for, not walking 10,000 steps that day. So those are the questions to ask are, how secure is my data and how private is it?
Before I let you go, is this one of those industries like the iPod where people are going to realize that they never realized they wanted this until Apple created it? Or is this something consumers have been clamoring for already?
Right. I think there isn't a lot of demand for smartwatches. That's true. I think people that are into fashion watches are going to be into this, and people who are Apple fans and into fitness tracking. But the general public's going to need to be convinced because watches have become less relevant. And ironically, it's these companies, these tech companies that are making these smartphones that have made the watch irrelevant. And now they're back in the game, Samsung and Apple, making watches.
Getting us one step closer to Star Trek.
Right.
KQED Science Editor Andrea Kissick. Andrea, thanks for talking to us.
Thanks for having me.
The 1959 publication of photographer Robert Frank's book, The Americans, was a milestone. It changed the world's perception of America and of art photography. Now, an exhibit at the Cantor Art Center at Stanford sheds light on this seminal work. It features some images from the Americans and also dozens of rarely seen photographs taken by Frank at the same time that did not appear in the book. In 1955 and 1956, Robert Frank, a young Swiss-born photographer living in New York City, set out to traverse the United States. His goal was to capture America, its stark landscapes, and its ordinary people as they went about their everyday lives. Funded by a Guggenheim Fellowship, the year-long trip took him from coast to coast and back again. The result of this journey was a book of 83 photographs called The Americans. Published in the U.S. in 1959, it's widely regarded as one of the great achievements of 20th century photography. Raw and honest, the book depicts an unembellished view of America that was at odds with how most Americans were used to seeing themselves and their country.
After World War II, it was a period of great prosperity and great national pride, and that was naturally the outlook of the leading magazines too. The book is very critical of the United States. America often looks bleak, the people often look distracted or bored or alienated. It's not a peppy promotional propaganda for the country the way most of Life magazine was. But remember, it's a work of art. It's not a piece of political propaganda. What often gets forgotten when people talk about the book is how exciting Frank's vital curiosity about the country is.
After the publication of The Americans, Robert Frank turned to filmmaking. But what happened to the thousands of photographs from his travels that did not make it into the book? In the 1980s, more than 150 Robert Frank prints were donated to the Cantor Art Center's permanent collection. Yet they've never been shown together in a formal exhibition.
This exhibition, Robert Frank in America, is really a landmark exhibition. I realized we had this incredible opportunity to showcase this work. I also knew that we needed someone who really understood Robert Frank's work, who really understood photography in a very profound way. We invited Peter Galassi to be the guest curator of this exhibition because of his deep knowledge of photography and the role he has played as one of the most important curators of photography in this country and in the world.
The Cantor Art Center has a great Robert Frank collection that's particularly rich in photographs that are not in Frank's book. There are only 83 pictures in The Americans, and it's a visual poem. It's not a compilation of his best pictures.
Now tell me about this show. How do you have this show organized?
It's Robert Frank in the 50s, and the show is mostly organized according to the themes. What did he look at? Ordinary people, religion, politics. But the key thing is the individual is sort of the building block of society. So that's one kind of picture he makes over and over again.
So what's unique about this show is that there are a number of photos that the public have rarely seen.
There are lots of very unfamiliar pictures here, even to experts, especially in the Cantor's collection. This is one of my favorites of them. This is the South in the time before the Civil Rights Movement. This is the Jim Crow South. Frank was a young Jew from Switzerland. He hadn't had any experience of skin color racism. He goes to the South, and it really hit him, the racial segregation. And about this picture in particular, he said that he just couldn't understand the fact that a white Southern woman would entrust their baby to the care of a black woman, but wouldn't sit next to them at the lunch counter.
There are also a lot of photos here that seem to have a political theme.
Yes, you're right. Because remember, he's trying to give a sense of the country as a whole. He felt that the sort of bombast of political rhetoric was something that he wanted to skewer a little bit.
And here stylistically, he's got the people who are cut off. It's a very different style of shooting.
He was very good at selecting the telling detail. So here's the first picture in the Americans, but it's also a picture that shows one of his most powerful stylistic inventions. He brilliantly developed this template where you have one or two individuals who are trapped by pictorial forces that ends up being a very eloquent metaphor for lonely people trapped in social circumstances.
Why do you think these images still resonate with people today?
Well, I think that good art always has the potential to resonate far beyond its own time. In this case, he wasn't just working on a little problem. He was trying to understand the whole country. And he was trying to explore how does an individual relate to the nation as a whole. Well, that's something that never goes away, that we're still struggling with now. You see here a young artist of enormous talent figuring something out that he's passionately interested in. You can see it on the pictures on the wall while that's unfolding. I think that's thrilling.
And the Robert Frank exhibit runs through January 5th at the Cantor Arts Center on the Stanford campus. For all of KQED's news coverage, please go to kqednews.org. We're off next week for the Ken Burns series, The Roosevelts, which begins Sunday night. I'm Thuy Vu. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good night.